I'm Simon Blackmore from the OWL project. It's quite a complex, it's turned into quite a beautiful project because there's quite a few people involved, so I'll just try and give you a sense of the project and who the people are. So I'm Simon Blackmore from the OWL project, and there's 3 of us in that group who make kind of sculptures and installations, which I'll show you in a bit, and then got Nikki here from Amenity Space, which is
we're actually an architectural practice, but we get involved in quite a few public art projects as well. And I work with a chap called Tony Broomhead, and there's 2 of us in our practice. But we've both of us have been brought together through another chap.
Yeah, for another chap called Ed Carter, who isn't here today. He's gone to the South by Southwest.
Lucky guy.
Lucky thing in Texas. He's enjoying the sun or something now. And yeah, he found it. I'd worked with him a bit. He's worked with Amenity Space before, and this I don't know how much you know about this Cultural Olympiad project, if anyone's come across it or what they've seen. But basically, the Arts Council decided for the Olympics to try doing 12 commissions and just opening it up to artists to just the remit was like anyone could apply, so it was just kind of your fantasy kind of project through the country, and so there's 12 regions throughout the UK, and Ed was living here in Newcastle, and he phoned up me and said it'd be great to make like some kind of water wheel on the Tyne that maybe kind of fed data from the river, and we processed data on computers, and something along these lines. And I thought about it for a bit, and the actual initial submission was really quite brief. You just had to put in like something like 400 words. It was ridiculous, really, and then just this one image. And so we had a long think about it, and we came up with the idea. We thought the whole idea of just putting sensors in water and kind of showing computer visualizations would be really a little bit dull. And we started thinking about how we could kind of turn this thing into a more kind of fantastical kind of exploration of kind of more medieval techniques and Victorian techniques, and maybe use computing in places, but somehow try and process the water into like a kind of musical instrument through more mechanical means. And I mean, it's kind of gone through many stages actually. Like when we first put in the proposal, this was what we came up with. We found this crazy kind of mill, which we were just looking at a minute ago and thinking that would never work. Thought it might. I hadn't really looked at mills that much at the time, and then we had it linked to this room, which would have much more kind of Victorian kind of visualization kind of processes, and then we had to put together a bigger application, and we started kind of thinking about it more as a holistic kind of organ thing, and I don't know, it went through lots of changes really, just thinking about how we would actually turn this into something. So I'm actually going to jump back now, and I'm just going to show you some of the work that the OWL project do, just to give you a sense of where we're coming from it in terms of materials and what we make and do. And then Nikki's going to show some Amenity Space, and then we're going to come back and look at kind of how the project's going. So I'll just jump into what we do. And yeah, I mean, this is a slightly... This is our first kind of work about this. It goes back about 2004, 2003, yeah, something around there. And this is when there are 2 of us in the OWL project, and we were kind of both been working a lot with technology, computing, and this kind of software, and become really bored of just the remits of software, and kind of wanted to break out of the kind of structures that you get placed within when you start trying to make music and sequencing in kind of audio software. It seemed like everything where you made music on a laptop made it sound the same. So we kind of just started making these kind of 2 log1Ks, we called them at the time, and they looked like laptops, and the whole thing was, we weren't really musicians as such or anything, so we just kind of, the idea was just to make these kind of funny Flintstone things that would look like laptops, and really just question the whole kind of idea that, I mean, at the time there was a lot of this kind of, really felt like technology was being spoon-fed to you as a kind of means to be creative, and it was like you almost if you were to buy a certain piece of technology, you'd be opened up into this world of kind of creativity, and that kind of hit a nerve with us in a way. We just like kind of thought, well, we'll just start from scratch, and we literally did, and we kind of had these switches that would would wire to batteries and then play them through the sound system, and so we just send voltage straight to the kind of sound system, and like we had these lights to light up to be the screen kind of thing, and they were actually like just mains light kind of thing, so they just made this kind of huge hum through the system. So yeah, obviously like pretty crude sounding electronic music, and that was like the first foray into kind of the world of electronic music, and we kind of started to play those in lots of venues and go to some strange festivals around Europe, quite small, kind of interesting festivals, and play this kind of machine. And then we kind of, after spending ages working on that and not actually making other objects, we started to make more kind of portable versions of this thing, and obviously these are called iLogs, because actually they look huge, but they're actually just small, this sort of size. And I can just show you what a couple of those do. Yeah, this one can record like 20 seconds of audio and then play it back live, so it's a bit like the equivalent of the iPod, which obviously holds a lot more audio, but it's a really kind of limited instrument, so we're kind of interested in that idea of something being really so limited, it kind of forces you into a kind of really pushing the limits of that instrument. And so quite often now I play live with just this and a couple other things, and it's kind of such a simple thing, but it really makes you consider every kind of action and get into that small instrument. Yeah, and this is another one called the photosensor that turns light into sound through kind of amplitude modulation. So different lights emit different frequencies. Like sometimes you hear it even on mains lights. Those are the kind of portable instruments we made from the Log 1K, and I think this kind of comes sometime through the middle of it all, where we were kind of interested in, we'd started this weird kind of relationship between wood and electronics that kind of suited us, and it was this idea that, I mean, first of all it just started as almost a Flintstone kind of joke thing, but then kind of, it's just kind of quite interesting to be able to make something with your hands that kind of looks desirable and kind of has those kind of same kind of relationships you have when you look at kind of technology in a shop and you're like, oh, I really like the look of that, but it's just a log, and playing with those kind of tensions. But we're also kind of interested in all the time, like, how can we use the process of woodworking a bit more interestingly, rather than it just being like a kind of wooden housing. So we came up with this project Sound Lathe, where we thought it'd be really fun to kind of take the waveform of a wooden spindle and convert that into sound. And there were a few things going on actually. That was one idea, of taking the waveform of wood and turning that into like a sound wave, and then also we kind of got into this old technique of green woodworking, where you work with wood outdoors in the forest, and you kind of use this foot-powered lathe to control the lathe, and how that whole kind of rhythm and could be turned into kind of like a musical rhythm. So we developed this lots of ways to do that, and kind of spent, I don't know, it's been a really long, complicated project of just trying different ways of converting this woodworking instrument into an electronic music instrument. And so this is a workshop with this guy called Mike Abbott, who's based down in Herefordshire, and he's kind of one of the people over the last 20 years that's really kind of brought life to this old craft, and he's been doing a lot of workshops. And obviously, I think at the moment there's quite a lot of interest in this kind of whole going back to nature, craft making, and it's turned into quite a popular thing where people come and do workshops with him. And it's kind of interesting because I think to actually have done that job 200 years ago would have been hellish. You would have been churning out legs all day, but now it's kind of got this romantic quality to it. And this is us working with him to make the music.
He's not gonna laugh. He's not turned like this himself.
And this is the little sensor device that we developed to try and pick up the curve of the wood.
Is it going over the bridge?
But I think that's probably quite an important project in the relation to flow, because at the moment we're going through a process of trying to meet lots of craftspeople who are kind of working in similar styles of wood and who might be able to kind of work into the project somehow, and just trying to figure out who's around in this area doing that kind of work and would be interested in kind of working on it and how we can use it and that sort of thing. I'm just going to quickly show this project. It's got like a kind of accelerometer inside it, and so it can do kind of rolling. I thought it was making sound, but it's just a cable. Thought that was clever. But it can make sound. We developed it as a kind of controller for making interfacing with music software, because the whole process of us trying to work outside of the computer, we're obviously always using computer as well, so we've been trying to work out how we can engage with it in something that, a way that kind of suits us best. And so we came up with this kind of USB controller kind of idea, and it's also met one of the problems we've had over the years, is people are always kind of asking how they can buy one of our instruments, and we've never kind of had the inclination to kind of run to try and mass produce them, because it always seemed a bit kind of against what they were always about. So we've kind of been running these workshops where people can come and make their own version of this, and for us it's just a really, it's turned into a much nicer way of kind of distributing our products, as it were, than just making kind of batches of them. And so the idea is that everyone comes along and gets an empty log, and then kind of figures out how they want to kind of configure the whole thing to work for them. What's fantastic is we get just like, each one's quite different, and people come up with all sorts of kind of ingenious places for putting things, and I don't know, different interpretations of what this kind of handheld gadget might be, and yeah, really I guess it's we're so kind of subsumed with these kind of gadgets, it's kind of nice to be working on them from the bottom up and just creating something from scratch with people. I think that's a pretty good background to all the stuff we've been doing in the OWL project. I mean, what I've missed out actually is a lot of these instruments, we do use them, we show them kind of as objects obviously, and then we also play live with them quite a lot, so there's kind of quite a lot of performance. And obviously I showed you the really early one, but now we do more kind of longer sets using lots of different instruments, and I haven't shown that very well, but yeah, another time. I'm going to let you listen to Nicky and his project, and his background, because it's, for us it's kind of really early days. Like we've met like 3 times or something, and last night we shared a hotel room.
It's very romantic.
all very romantic, yeah. Yeah, so now we're just finding out how that we work with each other during this project, because we initially thought they were just kind of conventional architects, but as it turns out, I don't think they are at all, really. So.
Well, thanks. As Simon quite rightly said, we got together through Ed Carter, who's sort of masterminding this thing, and Ed kindly got in touch and said, well, I'm working with the OWL project on this floating water wheel. It's a structure. Can you guys come and give us a bit of advice, really? So we got together just in the early stages of the pitch, which was the 400-word submission, which actually won Ed and the OWL project the actual thing. We helped out with a few sketches, but we'll move on to perhaps how our input in this project will develop, I think, in a short while. So I'll just explain a little bit about Amenity Space and what we do. We started, there's 2 of us, there's me and Tony, and we started up by working in London. We both studied in Sheffield, at the University of Sheffield, at the School of Architecture there. We ended up moving to London, working for various other architects, ended up working for the same architect who ran out of work and didn't have anything for us, so we were kind of interested in pursuing our own projects. One of those projects at the very, very start of the formation of the practice was actually working on a radio show on Resonance FM, which is the sort of independent arts radio station based in London. And we did a weekly show on Resonance about the built environment, about architecture. It's a 60-minute show, and we got to kind of go and interview lots of different people, lots of very interesting architects. We went round, made field recordings in various interesting spaces around London. But one of the most interesting spaces that we started to document was actually those spaces that people don't normally consider to be that iconic. So we were looking at kind of really offbeat places like public toilets and I don't know, like underneath the bowels of London Bridge Station, places like that, where we'd actually make field recordings and we'd investigate a bit more about history of those sort of places and what makes these kind of very sort of quirky, odd parts of land that are special for us. We got quite interested in this, and that sort of actually gave us the title Amenity Space. Amenity Space is actually, it's a term that's used by planning authorities for those areas, those leftover spaces, those leftover bits of land which nobody really touches. And we got fascinated, I think probably because people can't really use those parcels of land to actually develop anything in particular. We were and we didn't have any particular work on, so we thought, well, actually let's kind of look at projects that would utilise these spaces and perhaps do something slightly differently. And after starting on Resonance FM doing this radio show, we did that for a couple of years, but then we started to get these small commissions, small arts commissions more than anything actually, which enabled us to kind of use the work that we've been, use our radio kind of experience to kind of infuse that in a bit more of a practical manner maybe. So we actually started about 2.5 years ago. It was 2 years last summer, where we did a thing called the Sonic Shed Project, which was a part of part of the Architecture Week, which is now defunct. But that was a small commission that we got, and it's the first project we did together. It was about placing 2 sheds which we kind of modified, and we acoustically treated these 2 sheds, garden sheds, and we placed one in Yorkshire Sculpture Park and one was underneath the Westway in West London. We kind of streamed live sound between the 2, so that when you went into one shed you could kind of be immersed in the experience of the other location. There was a very rural location and a very urban location, the one in the Westway in London. So you could kind of escape and go into these 2 different sheds. After that we got a small commission called Jabberwocky, which was in Leeds. Really, really small commission, which we basically got asked to contribute to the Leeds the Light Night, which is the Leeds Festival, which kind of looks at interesting lighting projects. We got a very small commission to actually put together something for the University of Leeds in the Pearson courtyard. There was a load of stained glass windows in this courtyard, which you could only read the text in stained glass window from inside the actual building. So we wanted to illuminate the courtyard, and actually so you could read this text from outdoors and look at the space. So we had to reflect the text. So we created these 4 obelisks, which were kind of lined, and so when you stood in one position in the courtyard, you could kind of get this view across the face of these obelisks and actually see the whole corridor reflected within the mirrors. And in the back of these mirrors as well, there were these little seats. Let's use this thing. Little seats that you could sit in and just read the text that was actually being shone through in the negative way from the stained glass windows. Stained glass windows were created by a famous engineering company called Pearson & Sons. We got a commission in the Royal Festival Hall on the South Bank, and this was in summer 2008, and this was, we basically got this commission to look at ways of redefining the South Bank Centre, the 3 buildings that make up the South Bank Centre, which is the Queen Elizabeth Hall, Royal Festival Hall and the Hayward Gallery. And we did 3 1:25 scale models made out of foam blocks, which you can see here. This one on the right there is the Royal Festival Hall, and there's 20 blocks, these sort of rubberized and foam covered blocks, which you could create a 3D jigsaw basically, so you could reconfigure the festival hall, or as lots of kids did, because it was during some holidays, they'd come along and they'd make all their own structures based on the building blocks of the festival hall. The blocks themselves also had little RFID tags in, which would, as they moved around the space, they would trigger bits of film played on these screens all around the space. So it's interactive technologies. We did a project here last year, which was called Monitor, whereby there was a seminar called Clicks and Mortar. The delegates at the seminar would move around the space, and as they moved around the space, we actually they were being tracked, like these eyes here, which you can see. This was a projection in the bar space just over the way, and there's 4 quadrants which represented the 4 different rooms where the seminar was taking place. As they moved between the spaces, then the eyes would kind of open according. Each delegate was represented by 1 eye, and the eye would open depending on which space they were in. So it's a kind of comment about surveillance, observation in public spaces and public buildings such as this. I'll move on quickly. Project that we did in Leeds, which is kind of this is very typical of the amenity space kind of ethos really. There's an old building site which during the recession the developer said, well, actually we can't afford to do the building that we've got planning permission on, but we don't want this site here to kind of just sit unoccupied whilst they work out what to do with it, because they had no money. So we actually got a small commission to convert the top area, the top bit of the actual site here, then convert it into a fancy kind of woodland, and it was called Wonderwood. It wasn't our decision on the title of that, but we ended up kind of creating this kind of green space which was used by all the offices and all the local community that were based all around the actual space in Holbeck in Leeds. Working with the community and local schools, do lots of work with school groups and various different communities around the country, but this was one project which was quite good fun, which was working with some school children. We were commissioned by RIBA, Royal Institute of British Architects, and the BBC to do a series of studies to actually create this pavilion, and this was like that process, our concept diagram, which went through working with all the kids' sketches to develop this, and we kind of had to get 25 kids' ideas all incorporated into this. This is a pavilion which was for broadcasting media content, which has been supplied by some other schools, and we ended up building this thing outside Southwark Cathedral, which was good because it was on Grade 1 listed property, creating this kind of thing which it actually completely inadvertently, although it's outside a cathedral, there's no religious connotations, but it ended up looking like it looked like a priest, we thought, or a priest's hat. And this was a little periscope inside which you could look up at and get views outside of the cathedral. This is a project in Leeds, lighting project, where we created, put some lights on this bridge, which is for Opera North, and as people move over the bridge, then the lights are triggered sequentially, so the light kind of tracks them as they move over the bridge, and it gave a real good public presence to the street. This is a project that we're working on now at Brixton Recreation Centre, where we're doing another light installation, whereby we have data that's being fed from the swimming pool. It's a recreation centre, there's a swimming pool in here and a gym in here. and audio is being transmitted to a central computer, and then that data is actually creating live stream of data to the lights here, which is then, so basically you get a representation of the activities going on inside the building to the outside of the building. This is really proud of this project. It's a new house which has just been built on a really tight, constrained site. You can't see it very well, but it's very narrow between a Victorian building and a Georgian property here. You can just about see that red dot on there. This is the Victorian building on the right-hand side, and basically over 2 years have worked with a client to develop a new timber framed house, which we've just, the scaffold's just come down last week, and we've actually managed to squeeze this quite obscure looking thing into between two very period looking buildings in North London, in Newington Green, and there it is there, so that's just been finished. So this is now looking at flow. We basically came on board to help look at the structure, because the whole idea is it's a water wheel which is going to house, primarily I suppose, it's a water wheel which is providing power from the River Tyne to actually power up the musical instruments that are being created by the OWL project. So we need some sort of pavilion or structure that can actually float on the Tyne, which is a job in itself, and also provide all the right things needed to safely contain and safely exhibit the artworks inside. We just started. I mean, we had a few discussions, like our project and us and Ed, and and the idea was that it was going to be quite a rustic thing. Obviously, the OWL project kind of aesthetic is very kind of, it's an interesting kind of take on materials, really, on timber, and so they wanted to use it in a very natural, raw kind of way, really, something that's not over-engineered, something that can be done by local trade crafts, and also very important is to source all these materials very locally. So I suppose it's going to be the actual project. I mean, it's very early days in a design. These were actually the original, just the concept sketches which we used for the original submission, which got the job in the first place. But we were just looking at ways that we could kind of interestingly kind of tweak a shed, pretty much, and actually create something that's going to be a bit visually stimulating, but also be very functional, practical, and look of its type, I suppose. Look at something that is site-specific, look at something contextual that actually uses all these materials in a particularly honest way. And that was the sort of brief, and so we just started going through sketches, like looking at layouts. I mean, these are very early sketches. Things are going to progress and develop in a very different way, but we certainly want to kind of I don't know, use this material and use it to its maximum potential. And so really the sourcing of these materials is going to be very important. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But yeah, these were just the early sort of concept sketches, really. So moving on to flow, which we'll probably do now, and talking a little bit more about the project. I think it's important just to say that this is a project that's part of the Cultural Olympiad. So, there's 12 projects that have been commissioned for each region, each Arts Council region in the country. And each project is, there's a £500,000 budget attached to each project, so that's more or less £6 million worth of 6 million pounds worth of work. The Arts Council obviously really want these projects to be a massive success. It's important that the thing was won because it's got to be a sustainable project. The primary kind of focus is it's a sustainable project, and it's got to be local. It's got to be something that really, really is about the region. And so a water wheel doesn't get much more sustainable. It's all going to be powered locally, and it's on the River Tyne. It doesn't, it really kind of highlights the significance of a great river running through a really interesting waterfront. So, I think that's the general ethos of
and the kind of idea that the river kind of brought so much to the city in terms of it industry and that kind of thing, and then how that really polluted the river, and then now it's come back to some kind of more cultural river, I guess, cultural identity of the river.
That's it.
And playing with those things. And I guess we should show you where we're going to try and put it. Actually, it's not quite right, but I think this is, if anyone uses Second Life, you can actually go here now. But I drowned when I went there. This is the bit when I didn't drown. Kind of managed to film it a bit.
Drown?
Yeah, you can fly around, so I just fell in the water and couldn't get back up, and I was looking at it from below.
The guy that's done it, there's no access on there at the moment. That's something we've really got to address.
Yeah, but in Second Life you can fly, so it's okay.
Oh, I see, sorry.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So this is underneath the, well, it's just a bit further down from the Millennium Bridge, and it's actually going to be close to the Millennium Bridge. Opposite the Baltic is the site that we're looking at the moment. There's a pontoon there. which is actually used commercially, but we can, as part of the project, we can actually moor up against that pontoon. The actual, it's worth pointing out, I mean, it's a 6-month-long project, isn't it? It's going to be there for 6 months, and it's due to actually emerge on the Tyne at March 2012, and then it will run through to September or so.
I guess it will be there before. But I mean, the sustainability question is quite an interesting one, and one you might want to ask questions about later, because within our budget we've kind of obviously managed to budget for its opening time, and then we're still trying to figure out how on earth we deal with this thing afterwards. So we had to budget to like practically decommission it, where obviously we don't want that to happen, but we can't be in the position where we've got something that costs £10,000 to move and we're all skint. But in terms of the river and the flow, and I think this is quite an interesting starting point with this is it's not a piece of it. I mean, it's a pretty amazing idea. It's a water wheel that which you can just see behind there, that actually drags trash off the river, and I call it trash because it's in America, in Baltimore, and it's made by this guy called John Kellett, who actually came and visited us last week. And when we did the initial kind of the big application, we had to really look at like how realistic it is to build something like this, and Ed did a lot of scouring around, and he actually we ended up just finding this guy in Baltimore, which seems a little bit of a long way away to find someone, but he was someone who could do it. He's done it before, and he's done something quite interesting with it. So this kind of wheel goes around, and the trash gets pulled up onto this conveyor belt into this kind of bucket that goes out the other end. And we just spent it was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So he came over, and it felt a little bit of a risk, to be honest. We didn't know what kind of guy we were going to be talking to for 3 days, and whether it'd be worth paying him to come over and all of that. And but that was an amazing really 3 days, and
very, very useful.
This guy was such a good experience, because he's pretty much built everything. Like, he knew all about, from making the pontoon from steel to carpentry and woodworking, and he was like, I don't know, Americans always seem to be a little bit more gun-ho than our Brits, and he was just like, hey, yeah, you guys can just do this. And like, we were thinking, oh, who's going to make the wheel? And he's going, you can make the wheel.
Yeah,
and
that's good.
So it's all quite exciting now. We've got quite a good bit of energy towards making this thing, because we've I think
it was like counselling. You gave us a really good kind of encouragement that, you know, it is possible, it's feasible within the budget as well, which is so important.
Yeah.
You know, if everybody's committed and if everybody's enthusiastic. He's he was very useful. I think he's going to come. We'll probably use him again to actually just advise a bit more on actually how this thing gets put together. He's actually an engineer by trade anyway, but he's also built quite a few boats, and he's also the director of the Baltimore Maritime Museum. So his input was invaluable. He's built this by himself, and just listening about how the engineering might work, how you get the transmission of power from the wheel through to the the main thing is we've got to power up these instruments that the OWL project are creating. So how can you transform that power from the water into the actual building itself, into the structure, into the actual. And so we're using a series of cogs and series of belt drives and various different methods to actually use the mechanical energy. There's no power which is going to be, the only power on site will be created by the wheel itself. So the other issues that raises is, is the river going to be fast enough to,
we had quite a nerve-wracking kind of few days of just going down to the river thinking,
this is completely still. It's a glassy river, and to be fair, it doesn't move that much, but it's a tidal river, so as it comes up and down, you do get a movement at certain times during the day, but those times of the day may not coincide at particularly sociable hours. So it might be that this thing only works at 2 a.m. in the morning. So we had to question, well, is that right? Is there another way that we can actually generate power and make this wheel turn? And John was very useful at suggesting other ways to actually do that. Using other renewable sources, perhaps harnessing wind power. You could store energy in little batteries, and then you could actually pump water through onto the top, and that creates a different kind of. Maybe a different way of looking at it than what we thought, but it's certainly something that is a viable. It's certainly something that we're considering. So it's early days, but we are kind of.
And this is a kind of really the core of it, I guess. It's kind of bothering us at the moment, because the idea is that the the instruments, which I'll show you in a bit, the kind of things we've been thinking about developing, the idea is that the whole thing will be like a water organ, essentially, which is a really old, one of the first musical instruments, and that it would kind of breathe and move with the water, so that when the tide comes up, the wheel will obviously go a different way, go backwards, and then as the tide goes down, it'll go forwards, and the instruments will kind of move in sync with that. So, but at the same time, we need to find ways of making sure it does something when it's not moving, and so now we're going through a whole process of working out how much it will actually move and how much power it will give us. And this, I've just got this on, but this is an earlier model that we're probably changing now, but it gives you a sense of
scale. I mean, it's a similar scale to what it would be. This is actually, I mean, just talking about that, we're thinking of something that's 15 metres in length. It's about 5 metres across on the hull. We'll create these series of hulls, which will actually then put a deck on, and then we'll kind of spring the building up, a timber frame building up from that. And we've got to work out how the structure will then integrate with the instruments. One thing that we're really keen on is, well, Simon will talk about the instruments in a second, but I mean, perhaps there's ways that we can actually embed some of the mechanical workings of the instruments into the structure, so actually these things, the instruments aren't just providing you know, a bit of noise, they're actually kind of integral to actually how the thing stands up itself. So the whole thing becomes actually an art piece rather than just a pavilion or a gallery which houses various objects.
And I guess this gives a bit of an overview of, actually maybe I should use it, is it this red back?
Yeah, the middle ones.
Yeah, gives a bit of an overview of, again, a lot of this is kind of legacy of like old proposals, and things are always changing. And actually at one point we were kind of thinking maybe we needed to change it and purify water. I don't know, we always change the way things might go, but essentially at the moment we're just thinking it's a musical instrument on the Tyne, and yeah, so starting with, I guess the water wheel's the core of it all, and then the idea to generate electrical power that will kind of feed in any sensors we have, and microscopes to look at water. We're hoping to make a kind of periscope type of thing that goes underwater, that will be powered through this way, and then some things that look at turbidity, which is the kind of cloudiness of the water. And we've been kind of looking at a bit like our kind of eye log that converted light into sound, kind of looking into interesting experiments and ways of kind of interpreting things like turbidity and salinity, which I'll show you in a minute. But a lot of these instruments will be powered through kind of mechanical power. Yeah, this is and yeah, as I just said, the water organ's got like a really long history. In fact, John gave us this beautiful book about water wheels. If anyone's really interested, you can come and have a look at that. It's the history of the water wheel, and it's just amazing the amount of water wheels there were in kind of even like the 17th century, I guess, in Britain. There apparently between Bacup and Bolton there were like 300, which just seems an incredible amount in maybe 30 miles or something. And yeah, there were loads of these things all about the Europe, I think, mainly. And one thing we discovered after our proposal is that they're actually, the ones floating are called ship mills. So it's one of those things where you just find a different term for searching, and then you suddenly find there's a whole load more. And you can get these beautiful old etchings of like just people out almost at sea or on big estuaries with these big kind of mills to mill grain and that kind of thing. But this is a kind of interesting example of, this is this guy called Curated, who was around in the 17th century. He's kind of a really interesting early kind of media artist, I guess. He made these, he made amazing things, like there's a whole wealth of stuff. He developed kind of ways of projecting light as a kind of a cinema idea back in the 17th century, and you never really know how many things got realised, but he developed an awful lot, and weird things like kind of tunnels to go through walls to transmit sound, and he was seen to have been fascinated with the water wheel as well. So we've been looking at some of these ideas because we kind of never, I don't know, from moving from this idea of it being a kind of instrument that's using the data of the river, we kind of wanted it to use the power of the river and then the mechanics of the river. And so things have, at the moment, in our minds are turning a little bit more mechanical. So we're looking at these kind of old bellow systems that he designed here, and he actually had these kind of things like a drum organ where this drum would spin and then somehow control those musical pipes up there, and then this quite nice bell one where obviously the drum spins and then hits those bells. So there's a whole kind of wealth of old kind of automator and kind of ideas for doing this kind of thing. So we're trying to combine that with kind of more electrical.
Oops. Sorry, it was the glass.
Very nice.
That was very nice. You're good at these things.
Yeah, that's one of the bells. So yeah, the bubble synthesizer. This is a bit of a weird one. This was an idea to make. It's not a particularly exciting demonstration, but the idea is to have some kind of things like our log 1Ks that would use water and air as an input to make these kind of bubbles that would kind of sonify the rate of the river, something like that. So something actually, it's within the three of us in the Our project, we all kind of are looking at different kind of areas. So that's something I guess Steve's looking at a bit more than me, although I might get back into it, and because there's a kind of enormous potential for that. There's this whole area of computing called fluidics, where people are actually making like kind of logic gates and transistors through water, which is amazing. And kind of, so there's a kind of element that water might be used in that kind of way.
Yeah.
This is just a very basic idea of having something that can just look under the water, and you can wind down and hear what's going on under there.
We've got to make sure the water's clear enough. Apparently it's very, very dark.
Yeah, it is very dark, and this isn't. This is actually somewhere in Manchester. This is a more practical experiment I made, trying to make a peristaltic pump using wood to pull water around, because obviously one of the core things we need to be able to do is move water. So those bearings just kind of force the water through. This is the sort of thing I use for kidney dialysis, and that. But it worked pretty well. Okay, so this one I think we're definitely going to go for something along this line, which is the idea of one of the great things about the Tyne is it's like a tidal river, so you kind of get the salt water coming in and out. And this was the idea that we put different salty waters in different jars, and then kind of made this kind of array of things that go through and put electrodes in them essentially. And as depending on the saltiness of the water, you get different readings. So we were thinking that would be a really nice way to kind of make audible the kind of hidden processes that are happening in the Tyne all the time.
It's nice as well, because that's the kind of thing that, obviously it's great working with the Our project on this and seeing how those things can then be dispersed into the building. So perhaps the fingers of those things could become part of the roof again. So it's a kind of way that it all kind of emerges into the structure. Yeah,
and in fact when we were doing our proposal, for the big proposal, we were like, oh, we really need, there's just one thing that really pulls this whole thing together, and we're like, I know, let's make the whole roof like that.
Yeah.
And we're like phoning up Nikki again, what do you think about
it's expensive.
making the roof like that? But yeah,
but there's ways that we can,
there's
different ways to actually incorporate that stuff.
But the saltiness thing's quite interesting. And one thing I haven't got footage of, which is actually in the show, which is a bit annoying. We spent 2 days I think, with the Environment Agency going around looking at all the ways they're actually monitoring the water. And they were really great and really helpful, and showed us their different sites around the area where they're kind of monitoring the water. And they also did a kind of current measurement going across the Tyne, and kind of checked the different rates throughout the river kind of thing, and through the depth through some kind of clever ultrasound system they were using. But they also had a salinity thing with them, which I couldn't really work out how it worked. It just seemed to be a big pink blob. but they just put this thing in the water, and apparently, obviously, I had an impression that the saltiness would just kind of come in and merge and go out again, but what seems to happen is, because salty water is more dense than fresh water, it just sinks to the bottom, so you get quite a clear definition. So so I guess the whole process is like us having ideas of an instrument that might work, and then actually meeting people who really know about this stuff and trying to find out the science of what's going on there.
Yeah, it's certainly, I mean, it's just interesting. I mean, sort of kind of, I guess we'll round up quite soon, but the I think a lot of the ideas are great ideas that our projects are bringing forward, and you know, we're kind of working together on how this is, you know, how these things can be fitted out within the space, and how actually the experience of somebody going, because it's going to be fully immersive, you're going to be able to walk into the structure and you're going to be surrounded by these weird and wonderful objects, and how, you know, they're all going to be moving, they're all going to be responding to various different aspects of the River Tyne. It's important, you know, the River Tyne is the thing that's generating this thing. I mean, it's coming back to a very natural catalyst, and it's very interesting how that information will be then absorbed, and how you're going to experience that as you walk onto this floating pavilion. And you know, this is only going to come around through a very, very interesting collection of people who have got particular skills in different areas, and Ed's been really great at kind of finding these people and actually matching people up, and that will continue to happen. I mean, we're going to go off after this actually and meet a woodworker, a green oak worker up in well, just who he's getting Whitley, isn't he, I think?
Yeah.
And you know, just looking, so we're going to meet him, and we've got all these other people that we've got to meet, just to kind of find this perfect balance of skills, knowledge and enthusiasm for a project that, you know, is actually quite a serious, difficult proposition, something that floats, that you're allowed to have hundreds of people walking onto. So we've not really talked about the materials, but learning about different timbers and different types of seed, you know, the vast number of different cedars there are, so using the right one which will respond well in a half the time salty salty water and half the time fresh water, and just things that aren't going to corrode, because as we sort of touched on earlier, I mean, you know, we don't just see it as a 6-month project, we want it to, we don't, you know, the commissioning process should allow this thing to kind of last, and hopefully it'll be good enough that people will kind of use it in the long run.
Yeah, hopefully it can be used for
so
some
we're designing it in such a way that it's a permanent piece rather than just a 6-month.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, hopefully by using kind of local craftspeople and that kind of thing, we can make something that is just really really there to last, kind of thing.
Make a lot of friends who know
so if
how
anyone
to put it.
knows where to put one,
Yeah,
that would be good.